Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre came out swinging today, but not against the Liberals. He has the NDP leader in his sights.
My message to sellout Singh is this: put the people ahead of your pension. Break the costly coalition with Trudeau to trigger a carbon tax election.
Poilievre sent a letter to Singh calling on him to immediately end the deal he made with the Liberals to keep them in power until next summer. But one of the negotiators of that deal disagrees with Poilievre's push.
It is not up to Pierre Poilievre what happens here. Pierre Poilievre wants to have an election because he thinks he can win and he can make the cuts that he wants to make to pensions, to EI, to health care.
What will Canadians make of this battle? It's time to bring in the power panel. James Moore is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Andrew Thompson is a former Saskatchewan NDP cabinet minister. And here with me in studio, Karleen Varian is a former chief of staff to Liberal cabinet ministers. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here today. Andrew, I want to start with you. Listen, no one thinks that Jagmeet Singh is going to just fall to the floor here and go, you got me, Pierre Poilievre, it's all over now. But do the NDP have anything to worry about here when Poilievre is making this argument that Singh is only in it for his pension, for instance?
Well, I mean, it's a ridiculous thing, especially coming from Pierre Poilievre, who has been eligible for a pension since he was 31 and lives in a taxpayer-funded mansion. You know, it's kind of a goofy thing for him to raise. But, you know, the question of the supply and confidence agreement does cut both ways. Liberals love it. Tories hate it, and the NDP, it's a bit of it's an issue to needle them on. I think what you're starting to see, though, is coming into focus is beyond the agreement, what this is actually about, and that is the question of what would a Conservative government keep, what would they cut out of what's currently being done. The NDP obviously are putting forward an argument that says the way to help people is make more investments in healthcare, more investments in dental care, more investments in housing. The Conservatives, on the other hand, are putting forward an argument that the way you help people is you cut taxes and you cut the size of government. That's starting to end up being that kind of Goldilocks scenario. Now, where the Liberals are, I think they're stuck in the position where nobody really likes what they're doing, but they've got the lukewarm bowl of cereal in front of them. So we'll see how this plays out, but I think that that's kind of what is really behind this as we head into the election.
Well, Andrew, I mean, I'm going to ask you, we talked about the supply and confidence agreement earlier this week on the power panel, and François Boivin was saying, listen, if Jagmeet Singh can't come out and say, I will absolutely break this agreement, break with the Liberals over workers' rights, given the rail strike and the rail stoppage and the binding arbitration, how do you make an argument for this deal anymore? And I wonder what you say about that. I take your point about the contrast with the Liberals and the Conservatives, but what is the argument that this is still working for the NDP?
Yeah, so I've been saying for months that my preference would be to get out of the agreement, and that's been a view of a number of New Democrats along the way, that it's served its purpose. The NDP can now be just as effective on an issue-by-issue basis. I don't think there's a lot more for them to be gained staying in it. In fact, if anything, I think there's a lot of risk, because what you do allow is Pierre Poilievre and others to say, we're the only really effective opposition in the country. And I do think there are a certain number of, anti-Liberal supporters who would otherwise be voting NDP who are attracted to the Conservatives on that. I mean, but I've been of that view for some time that it served its purpose and should move on. And, you heard that from others. Certainly when Ed Broadbent was alive, he was of the same view.
James, I want to bring you in here. I mean, let's call a spade here. This is some pretty raw politics that Pierre Poilievre is playing with today. Who is this for? What is it that he actually intended to accomplish when he came out and said, all right, Jagmeet Singh, this is on you?
Well, I think, frankly, blue-collar working-class voters who don't see their values or their emphasis of policy priority anywhere near the priorities of Jagmeet Singh and the contemporary NDP. It's astonishing when you see in real time, and it happens from time to time, but when you see people in real time not be self-aware of their own self-interest, it's pretty staggering. And the NDP have now had 2 budget cycles where they've said, look, hear me now, and believe me, but you'll see the results in the fullness of time, that this confidence supply agreement, we're going to get things done, and people will see that good policy, progressive policy, is going to result in support for us. And here we are, after 2 budget cycles, and the NDP are further down in the polls and going nowhere fast under Jagmeet Singh's leadership. So what are they saying now? They're going to double down and reemphasize this agreement and keep soldiering forward, where they would be wise to take Andrew's advice, break away from the agreement, recognize reality on reality's terms, that the next election campaign is clearly a change campaign And if the budget, the ballot proposition in the next campaign is, do you want change or more of the same? It is impossible now, and will be even more impossible a year from now or a year and a half from now, for Jagmeet Singh to say, I recognize that the people don't want Justin Trudeau and the Liberals in power anymore. That's why you vote for us. And Pierre Poilievre can very simply, effectively, and clearly, with all the evidence in the world, say there are two outcomes in this campaign: Justin Trudeau-style government or an alternative that's us. And that is it, because NDP and Liberal, it's the same thing. So Jagmeet Singh is frankly digging his own political grave.
Carleen, do you think that for the Liberals, do they look at this and go like, okay, well, at least we get a day off from being asked whether Justin Trudeau is going to resign tomorrow? Or is there a reason for concern here that this puts pressure on a deal that has been useful to the Liberals?
No, I think that given that we're sort of in the dying days of summer, I don't think that the Liberals are going to mind just having a bit of a break from the 24-hour news cycle. They're just coming off a cabinet retreat where there were no shortage of questions for the Prime Minister about the future of the government. And, you know, for the Conservatives, I think this was the move to make, credit where credit's due, right? You're at the high water mark in the polls. You're looking at potentially still 12 months to go before an election really has to happen. And you know that there's one of three scenarios that's going to happen. You're either going to grow your lead, you're going to hold on to what you have, or it's going to shrink. You're probably not feeling great about your chances of growing that lead when you're already at 43 in the polls. The idea of holding on to such a lead for 12 months is a challenge for anybody. And you absolutely want to avoid the third scenario happening at all costs. So what do? You call for an election. You want that writ dropped yesterday. So in a sense, this play today was expected.
I did suggest that this deal has worked well for the Liberals, and I suppose the other way to look at it, a critique that you do hear in some places is, it did bind the Liberals to some of these NDP priorities, which were quite expensive and have shaped their political course forward in a way that may or may not have benefited them. If you're in the Prime Minister's office right now and you're looking at this deal and going, oh, well, are the NDP getting cold feet? Is there any reason to try to keep it going, to have more talks, to maybe add more incentives for the NDP, or you just let it ride?
I think now that we're down to this final year, there's less motivation, right? I mean, with each year that passes, more longevity of the government has been achieved. It's sort of like the lease on a car, right? So I certainly think that they're not as desperate to keep it together as they were 12 months ago or 24 months ago when it first came together. I also think that they're pretty confident now that they are at the point where they can probably successfully head into a campaign taking credit for some of these things, especially pharmacare. If that actually manages to get implemented this fall before we go to an election, that's a big thing for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals to hit the hustings with, saying Pierre Poilievre will take this away. You have it now. If you elect him, it will be taken away.
Andrew, I think another piece of the discussion that I think you often hear around Ottawa is the idea that the NDP's hands are ultimately tied here. They have not had a big bump in the polls, and they don't have a lot of money. I mean, are they really just sort of at the mercy, by and large, of political forces bigger than themselves at this moment?
I mean, the landscape is, certainly moving. The NDP has struggled to make sure that they are getting credit for the initiatives they put in. I think that's one of the things a lot of us called out at the start, which is with all of these agreements, the junior party within these kind of agreements often doesn't get the credit. I see that having been in a government that had the Liberals as a junior partner, and they eventually got absorbed into what was left of them, got absorbed into the NDP. So, I mean, these two, when you end up with these change elections, when you end up with binary choices put in place, the junior parties often struggle, which is, I think, largely James's point. The question, though, is, what the NDP's message is going into that campaign. If they can set it back up to being the Tories who want to cut and bring back austerity, the Liberals just want to do more of the same, but it's the NDP that's been fighting to put in place the programs that really matter, whether that's childcare, dental care, whatever their list is. Then you've got a different kind of choice going into the election. And that, I think, is what they've got to hope for. Whether that's good strategy or not, I guess we'll find out in a year. But, I think that's the calculus right now.
I'm really interested, Andrew, in what you think the lesson, I'm going to ask you to put on your historian hat here for a minute, what the lesson will ultimately be from the supply and confidence agreement. I know it's really hard to say without having gone through an election cycle, but do you see this as a tactic that other other political parties will look at and go, hey, we should try that out sometime? Or do you think the lesson here is going to be you might be playing with fire if you get involved in one of these?
Well, we've had this through a number. I mean, I guess this is one of the few ones at a federal level, but certainly at provincial levels, we've seen this before. Going back, Ontario, of course, had something similar in propping up the government. The agreement of the 10-point plan of what would need to be delivered for opposition support. The NDP in Saskatchewan had this with the Liberals. It's not unusual to have them. I mean, you've got to have a certain set of circumstances. I think the question always comes back, though, how long do they go on, and how do you make sure that the initiatives that the junior parties bring in are the ones that get credit? That, the lesson almost always, with the exception maybe of Ontario, is that the junior party is punished.
Fascinating. James, I would be crazy to not use this opportunity to ask you what you think, switch topics a little bit here, and ask you what you think of what has happened with the Conservative movement in BC. What do you think of the move we saw yesterday, this dramatic shift, the BC Conservatives basically becoming the face of the centre-right movement in British Columbia?
3 to 6 months ago, I would have said that it was probably a layup that David Eby was going to get reelected, and overnight there's now a horse race. And it's not just a horse race because voters have been denied, a sort of a binary choice on the free enterprise right, but there's clarity now of a choice, that you have John Rustad, who's a former cabinet minister under Gordon Campbell, who has credibility and substance, and the Conservative Party of British Columbia, that it's now opened its doors and welcomed in the official opposition party, which has fallen on its face. And so there's a lot of talent, a lot of money, a lot of organization. There's 87 ridings across the province. So you can imagine it's not just 87 candidates, but 87 official agents, 87 campaign managers, 87 social media managers. Like, all of that infrastructure now folds into one party that'll have to find a way, and they'll have their growing pains, and there'll be all kinds of, I'm sure, local fights about how this stuff gets integrated effectively. But the efficiency of the unification of the free enterprise vote in British Columbia creates an immediate horse race for British Columbia. And I think that'll cause the Conservative Party to have to up its game and to demonstrate to British Columbians that they're not just a protest vote. It's not just if you're frustrated about housing costs, or you're frustrated about drug policy, you're frustrated about the NDP approach to policy, that we actually have something to say about it. They need to have something to say. And the weeks are going to tick by very quickly from now until Election Day, because time is tight. So I think a lot of internal capacity to put the party together, have credible candidates, have a credible face as a cabinet, all aligned in the next few weeks is going to be it's going to be a massive task. But I think the public and the marketplace, the political marketplace, wants a choice and an alternative to David Eby, and it looks like they're going to get it.
Let me ask you, should John Rustad show some wiggle room on policy? We had him on earlier in the program. We talked about this question. He says, I'm holding on to my values, but some of those values have gotten him labeled essentially a party of conspiracy theorists by Kevin Falcon before he then handed the baton to Mr. Rustad. Do you think that they should use the potential room to maneuver here?
Yes, and I think clarity is key. You can have people of all kinds of, frankly, sometimes eccentric views, but if they all align on the core issues that are going to be the priority project issues for the government, then you can have some people who might have some eccentric views. But I think if you have enough people who create a critical mass who are going to become MLAs, who seem, frankly, to borrow a phrase from American politics, who seem profoundly weird, then I think that's going to be obviously problematic. So I think John Rustad would be wise to take this moment of the opportunity of the merger in the coming literally 2, 3, 4 weeks to find a way to find the most appropriate and effective candidate for each riding across the province, who will focus on the key priorities of 3, 4, 5 issues that he's going to have an absolute emphasis on between now and Election Day. So he needs to set the tone, though. He's the leader. He's the guy. He's the alternative premier in the province. He needs to pick 2 or 3 core topics, specific deliverables that speak to British Columbians, and then demand that all of his candidates align with those issues and have no tolerance for people who vary and provide views that are alternative to those 3 or get off base on other issues.
Okay, we are going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much to the Thursday Power Panel, James Moore, Andrew Thompson, and Carleen Berrien.
Thanks a lot.